the letter that John Paul II wrote alleging Archbishop Lefebvre had excommunicated himself and so forth, it was canonically very bad. And that's part of what has driven so much of the confusion, is that since day one, anyone who could walk and chew gum and pick up a commentary on canon law could find a way to blow open the whole accusation against Archbishop Lefebvre and the society, which basically just made things less clear. Pope Leo is a canon lawyer, and he's going to look at that and he's going to know that that was a dumpster fire of a situation. I think Leo would know that there'd be no way to give the SSPX a quote-unquote normal job. I think he knows that the bishops of the world would lose their minds. So it's a delicate situation. So what do you do? Well, this is my prediction, or my gut feeling. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Pope Leo hasn't been Pope very long, but something pretty monumental is going to be in his very near future, and it involves the Society of St. Pius X. Just before Pope Francis died, with whom the SSPX had a very good relationship, weirdly enough, considering how all over the map Pope Francis was, God rest his soul. One of the last remaining bishops of the society, Bishop Bernard Tissier de Malaret, died, God rest his soul. And then after that, Bishop Williamson, who had left the society but was one of the original bishops, he died as well. So now they're down to 2 living bishops who were consecrated by Archbishop Lefebvre. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to have to ask for more bishops, which they've been vocal about. And how Pope Leo is going to react to that is going to say a lot. So I think it helps to have a brief historical sketch of how we got to where we are and what the path forward might be. Stay tuned. All right, this is actually my second or third time attempting to record this. I made some mistakes, so hopefully I get this one right. And I'm going to be very brief about the history of the Society of St. Pius X, because I don't want this to turn into an hour-long video. I did write a book called SSPX The Defense, where I give a very detailed history of the society, and I am very partisan, as everyone who knows me knows. But there's a lot of information in there that you'd probably need to wrestle with, especially if you're anti-SSPX, because you're probably wrong. Because that's just the way it usually goes. And even if you are right, well, prove me wrong by reading the book and then writing a book to rebut it. So there you go. All right. So in 1988, Archbishop Lefebvre performed consecrations of bishops that he did have permission in principle to do, but not in actuality. What I mean by that is there was an accord reached between Archbishop Lefebvre and then Cardinal Ratzinger under John Paul II for the SSPX to have at least one bishop that was in the accord signed by both of them in May 1988. For a number of reasons, Archbishop Lefebvre had decided to consecrate, and I won't go into that here because that'll make this video way too long, and there was an agreement. Now, as soon as Archbishop Lefebvre started to try to get them to agree, okay, we're going to go forth with this now, here are the candidates, let me know, they kept having roadblocks, and eventually Archbishop Lefebvre believed that he was of the opinion that Rome was never going to give bishops. I think so many decades later, 37 years later, it was the year I was born. It was in June 30th, I think, and I was 3 months old at the time or something, so I have no recollection of it. But in my entire life, we have never seen a traditional bishop consecrated in the Catholic Church, have we? Except for the bishops of the society. Yes, there are bishops like Bishop Schneider, God bless him, who have certainly discovered tradition and become advocates thereof, but they don't come from traditional orders. The Fraternity of St. Peter has never had bishops. The Institute of Christ the King has never had bishops. The Institute of Good Shepherd and so forth. I don't think we've even ever seen men elevated from their orders to become bishops of dioceses and so forth. So it's never happened. So I think Archbishop Lefebvre was probably correct on that. Nonetheless, those who supported tradition and the continuance thereof believed that Archbishop Lefebvre was justified. Those who did not, including John Paul II, believed that he had done something that warranted a grave penalty of a lete sententiae excommunication, which is a fancy Latin way of saying he excommunicated himself by the act itself, and that he had committed a schismatic act. I won't go into the nuts and bolts here, but there is a difference between a schismatic act and creating a schism. And the popes themselves, since 1988, have said a variety of different things on that. Sorry to interrupt, ladies and gentlemen, but if you are still listening to this podcast, for some reason you enjoy hearing me talk, which I wish you could tell my kids that. Maybe they would But if you do want to have a chat with me, I am going to the Holy Land this September. You can find the link for that down underneath. Once in a lifetime pilgrimage. I'd love to have you with me and spend some time. And I hope to see you there. All right, back to the show. Fast forward, years after that, things get a little more complicated. Rome starts saying things like, yes, you can go to the SSPX for Mass. No, it's not a problem, and you're not under a penalty if you are confirmed by their bishops. That happened in 1991, by the way. Yes, you can support them financially. Then in 2007, something fascinating happened. In 2007, the traditional Latin Mass was essentially liberated from its prison, which it was unjustly put in. And now basically any priest can say the traditional Latin Mass. What does that have to do with the SSPX? Well, the SSPX, in their conversations with Cardinal Ratzinger and then Pope Benedict, were very clear that one of the stipulations was that for some sort of reconciliation was that priests had to have the right to say the traditional Mass. They believed every priest should have the right for it. And they launched a rosary crusade and they prayed like crazy when Pope Benedict was elected. And then a couple years into his pontificate, lo and behold, he liberates the traditional Latin Mass with Summorum Pontificum, which healed a great wound and was a very good thing. It didn't go far enough, but it was a good thing nonetheless. Then something else happens in 2009. He officially lifts the excommunications of the 4 bishops that were still alive. By the way, for those of you who think that the penalties against Archbishop Lefebvre and Bishop Castro-Mayer were not rescinded, well, they died. So you don't have to lift excommunications on dead people because penalties can only apply to those in the church militant, Catholics alive on earth, not those who are in the afterlife. So there you go. Also, they did actually say the penalties from 1988 no longer have juridical effect. That was an official pronouncement. So they were lifted, but anyway, they're dead, so it doesn't matter. In any event, that was fascinating because now every priest could say the traditional Latin Mass, and Pope Benedict said the traditional Latin Mass was never abrogated, which was why Archbishop Lefebvre got in trouble in the first place. It's because he said, you can't tell me to stop saying it. So that was interesting. And 2009, they're no longer excommunicated. So now you have these bishops who are no longer excommunicated, even though I would argue they were never valid. But anyway, legally speaking, no longer excommunicated even by the letter. And you don't have to say it. You can say the old Mass if you'd like. And then comes along Pope Francis and surprisingly goes even further than Pope Benedict and gives the SSPX basically a universal jurisdiction for the good of the faithful to hear confessions, and then opens up the possibility for them to say, hear weddings, witness marriages, which is something that happens all over the world. So now you have these bishops and priests who can hear confessions, who can witness marriages, who are not under any penalties and are not excommunicated. So you basically have this interesting situation with the SSPX. There are numerous other statements from Pope Francis as well. The late, great Bishop Huander, who lived the last years of his life with the SSPX, whose official job it was to work on behalf of work on behalf of Rome with the Ecclesia Dei communities, which included the SSPX. And sort of, they're not really an Ecclesia Dei community, but you know what I'm saying. Or maybe you don't, but whatever. And he lived his last few years with them and died from cancer while living with them, and asked for his burial place to be as close to Archbishop Lefebvre as possible because he wanted to spend eternity laying beside him, which I thought was beautiful. And he was very clear that Pope Francis told him in conversation that the SSPX were not schismatics. So anyway, lots of things have happened. Here's the thing. The SSPX now needs more bishops. And since Bishop Tissier passed away, may God rest him, the various superiors of the various different national districts have made it clear that, yes, there will be consecrations of bishops, and it's something that's, kind of in the works. And I've reported on this, and it's not new news. Now, that does not mean it will be some sort of secret middle of the night thing. No, the district or the general superior of the SSPX said, and I think 2021, and I reported on this a couple years ago, he was also clear that in order to have bishops consecrated, the society would follow the exact same steps that Archbishop Lefebvre followed. And what were those steps? Those steps were a series of conversations and basically negotiations to come to some sort of resolution to have the permission to consecrate bishops. Now, some traditionalists will say, well, why do you need permission from these modernists? Well, it's not for the sake of the modernism. It's to demonstrate the sensus ecclesiae, because you can't just go around consecrating bishops without explicit approval unless there is a state of necessity and very good reason. This is a basic principle for anything that is against the letter of the law but is necessary for the spirit of the law. So this is a demonstration of an attempt to show a willingness to do things in the proper way, which every Catholic should support if you believe there is a visible church on earth with a visible hierarchy. No matter what you may think about the hierarchy, you do need to at least try. That's just the way it is. And remember, the SSPX has had a history of going to Rome whenever called and demonstrating their fealty and so forth whenever possible. And it's yielded some decent results over the last 20 or 30 years, with a lot of things being loosened up and a better reputation being facilitated even by Pope Francis. And that's because they did their best to, play by the rules, as every Catholic should try to do. And Archbishop Lefebvre did the same thing. You remember, he started the Society of St. Pius X in 1970. Then there was a controversy around 1975 with a suspension. Then even 13 years later, after all the mudslinging that had been done against traditionalists, he still bent over backwards, did everything he possibly could, and went to meeting after meeting and negotiation after negotiation, and worked long and hard with Cardinal Ratzinger to come to an agreement in principle about a way forward. And sadly, that fell through. So the spirit of doing everything possible to work with your superiors in the, generally speaking, lawful sense is a very Catholic thing that even and especially traditionalists should demonstrate. At the same time, what on earth should take place in this exact moment, or what will take place and how Pope Leo will react, we have no idea. And that is where the rubber meets the road. We know that when the SSPX is going to request permission to consecrate bishops, it will be above board. It will not be a public thing in the news and all the Twitter and whatever. It will be something that's just done as, Catholics do with the, legal realities of the church. You won't see much of it because it'll just be, rightfully so, just something confidential between, between superiors and congregations and all that, whatever. And then there will come a point where there'll be an answer. And what will that answer be? That is the kicker. Does Pope Leo want to have another 1988? I sincerely think he does not. I don't think anybody wants to have another 1988, meaning another thing where you just have a controversy that just takes a lot to clean up. I think Pope Leo really, when he says he wants unity, my gut tells me that he's going to try to find a way forward. What will that way forward be? Well, there are a variety of moving parts. First of all, as hopeful as we can be under the new Pope, we must remember the crisis is far from over. The crisis is far from over. Modernism has not gone away. There are still many theological questions, and it's a big problem. And I wrote a book about this called What Happened to Catholicism. You can find the link for that underneath. The heresy behind the current crisis is the subtitle for that book, and that heresy has not gone away. So it's not as if the SSPX, in order to keep tradition alive, can just be resorbed by the Ecclesia Dei Commission, because that no longer exists. It's part of the CDF, or with the DDF. Anyway, it's gone. And the kicker is, as much as you may dislike the SSPX, some of you might, there's an old joke that I think Bishop Williamson used to say, that that it's like a tug of war between the modernists and the traditionalists. And all those traditionally minded orders and groups are tugging war against the modernists, and none of them want to look back to see what the anchor is of the rope, because it's the society back there anchoring the whole thing. But they don't want to acknowledge they're there, but they really hope that they don't let go. And that's basically the situation in the church. Again, there are no traditional bishops outside the SSPX, meaning bishops that have come from traditional orders. that orders that have kept tradition. Obviously, there are still Dominicans and stuff, but they've changed after the council. The only reason you have your Latin Mass is because Archbishop Lefebvre persisted, and this is manifestly clear by history. The indult was given in 1984, so people could go somewhere besides the SSPX at the request of those who wanted another option. Even the Agatha Christie indult in England, people like to point to that, and that was great, but that was never going to apply to the Universal Church because it was just for England. The Ecclesia Dei communities like the Fraternity of St. Peter and the Institute of Christ the King, they owe their existence to the courage of Archbishop Lefebvre, which makes it so sad when many of the members of the fraternity will do things like call the SSPX schismatic, which is just really, really sad. Christ tells us that no good tree can bear bad fruit. Well, the fraternity comes from the SSPX, so what does that say? And there's that. And then the fact that you have the lifting of the restrictions in 2007 of the Latin Mass was because of the SSPX, largely in part due to their persistence. And Cardinal Ratzinger, he knew Archbishop Lefebvre real well, and he had a lot of affection for him. And he wanted to find a way to heal that wound because I'm pretty sure he believed it was unnecessary and unfortunate, but he was under John Paul II, who was very high on ideals and did not have any practical understanding of the damage he was doing, I don't think, and the damage he inflicted on people by doing that. It was a very terrible move on his part. And his letter that he wrote, and this will bring me to Pope Leo, the letter that John Paul II wrote alleging Archbishop Lefebvre had excommunicated himself and so forth, it was canonically very bad and was basically contested since day one. And that's part of what has driven so much of the confusion, is that since day one, anyone who could walk and chew gum and pick up a commentary on canon law could find a way to blow open the whole accusation against Archbishop Lefebvre and the society, which basically just made things less clear. Pope Leo is a canon lawyer, and he's going to look at that and he's going to know that that was a dumpster fire of a situation. He's also said that he's a man of unity, and he does mean that in the sense of St. Augustine. St. Augustine was, one of the things that St. Augustine did is that he healed the division between most of the Donatists, at least, and the church. He was someone who not only would go after heresies, but St. Augustine was massively emphatic on charity and true charity, which it seems like this man is about. So when he talks about unity and so forth and not governing like an autocrat and whatnot, it seems like some sort of hat tip to the fact that he's going to be different than Pope Francis, who was very vindictive and castigating to conservatives and traditionalists, and he wants to sort of reverse course there. So I think he'll want a solution. And there was a motto that St. Augustine, or a statement of St. Augustine, that's it's a very famous quote, and it goes, "In essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; in all things, charity." And I think that's an animating principle of Pope Leo. I don't think he is not untinged or untainted by modernism. I don't think that's possible. Nonetheless, he does seem to be a man who has the mentality of in all things charity and unity in the essentials, and in the non-essentials liberty. Just yesterday in his homily and other things, he talks about the necessity for unity in faith. And he gave an address to other groups and things like that, other Christian groups, which was problematic in some cases, but he kept coming back to this unity must be a unity in faith, which is kind of refreshing, to be honest, because that's closer to the traditional understanding of unity or communion than has been understood in recent decades. The primary thing, the most important thing for communion, for unity, is faith. There are three things necessary for communion with the church. And it's faith, governance, and sacraments. So unity of faith, unity of governance, unity of sacraments. And the most important of those three things is ultimately the faith. Why? Well, because there can be things that impede a relationship with governance that are beyond your control. Because there can be an impossibility of accessing sacraments, for example. So at all times, one can be unified in faith. And we might think, for example, of the Christians in Japan, all those centuries ago, who didn't have priests for about 200 years. I mean, they had baptism, but they had no confession and they had no sacraments. They had no governance because they simply didn't have any priests around or any bishops. So what they had was faith. So that being said, I do think that Pope Leo would be open to finding a solution that is based in the fact that, of course, I don't think anyone would deny that the SSPX believes the Catholic faith, except for the most egregious and idiotic critics. And there is the fact that he doesn't want to have another, basically, scandal, and does not want to have something that leads to difficulties. So what would a solution like that look like? Here's what my gut tells me. I think Leo would know that there'd be no way to give the SSPX a quote-unquote normal job. Not just because the SSPX would be principled on their honorable and noble stick-to-itiveness about tradition, which I agree with, but also because I think he knows that the bishops of the world would lose their minds, largely. If they were forced in like a sense of, hey, they're just, they're just like anyone else and they're a part of your diocese now, I think that would not be good for anybody. At the same time, I think he would know that there are many bishops in the world. Heck, there even a cardinal. The one cardinal from Sri Lanka is very pro-SSPX. He said he would send his seminarians to their seminary if he could. So there are many who are totally happy with working with the SSPX. I think in America right now, there's something like 50 or 60 dioceses that use SSPX for their weddings, for traditional weddings, or permit it or whatever. I know there are many dioceses in Canada do the same thing. So it's a delicate situation. So what do you do? Well, this is my prediction, or my gut feeling. He's a canonist, so he's going to look at the interactions between the society and Cardinal Ratzinger back in the 80s, and he's going to see what sort of solution was proposed. And he's going to come up with a solution, I think, that is similar to that, which will basically be something like the SSPX has permission to just continue with their apostolate, and we look forward to a, continued dialogue and blah, blah, blah. And I encourage bishops of the world to work closely with them, for the needs of the faithful or something like that. I think it's going to be, I think that's the way forward. I think that's the way forward. And then as far as consecrating the bishops are concerned, then it's very easy to say something like, I give permission for the SSPX to have 2 bishops, 1 bishop, 3 bishops, whatever. Therefore, they will continue in the work of their apostolate, which everyone knows what that is. They just, sacraments, ordinations, etc. I think that's probably what the way forward will be. It's a way of giving permission. It's a way of giving recognition of doing things licitly, so to speak. But at the same time, it doesn't really force any bishops to do anything they don't want to do. And I think it would be very positive to have a solution like that because it doesn't force anyone to do anything like they don't want to do, like I said, but at the same time, it would send a message. So yeah, your local bishop may not want to work with the SSPX, but if you want to say that they're in schism, you just can't say that anymore because it just wouldn't fit. Also, there is the reality that there are many bishops right now on earth who are very conciliatory and very amenable to the SSPX. And I would never give away confidential information, but I do receive little bits of encouragement here and there from people you'd be surprised about. I am not involved in any conspiracies to sway papal elections. I've been accused of that, by the way. If I was involved in conspiracies to sway papal elections and I had that much sway over what was happening in Rome, I don't know if I'd be working out of my homeschooling room, just being honest. I think I might have a real big boy office, but here we are. And so in any event, there are many bishops in the world today that do have a great relationship with the SSPX. In some cases, they attend retreats done by the society. In some cases, they have SSPX priests as their confessors and so forth. This does happen. It does. In some cases, they give their properties to the SSPX to use for confirmations and stuff. And some of that is public. And some of it is more hush-hush, I'll help you out, but let's not make a thing of it. And that happens. And everyone around the world who spends enough time will know that on the ground, it's kind of interesting. So there is also the possibility that there are a number of bishops out there who I think would be more than willing to help out the SSPX. I think a Bishop Schneider would be more than willing to perform confirmations for them, or to help them with ordinations of priests. I think a Bishop Strickland would be more than willing to help out with that. I think Cardinal, what's his name, from Sri Lanka, would be an individual more than happy to help with that. And there are other ones that you would never think of, you never know of, because they don't have any public profile, but they're very friendly with society priests and their diocese and stuff, and you wouldn't know. So the question remains, would that be something that they would consider as a way forward? Is it instead of, okay, we give you a bunch more bishops, does the society trust the hierarchy? Does the society trust the Pope to say, well, how about we just get you guys your stuff done by other bishops? It doesn't fix everything, because the bishops do have to have the freedom to go around the world to perform all these things. But maybe there's some sort of compromise there. Would that be a good decision for the society? I don't know. On the one hand, personally, I would think it would be a good thing, in the sense that I think it would be a good thing if Rome basically said, hey, here's a bunch of bishops who are willing to perform your consecrations and ordinations and whatever, and confirmations. What do you think? Mike, I think that there's a value in that. At the end of the day, you want Rome to return to tradition, and having, bishops of the church, quote unquote, mainstream regular bishops doing traditional things. That's a good thing. It would also send a huge message that, the boys are back in town, my friends. Not only it's not just this little niche-y thing. It's not this thing that happens in secret. It's like, oh, wow, the bishop of that diocese is performing priestly ordinations for the Society of St. Pius X. Whoa. I don't know what that means canonically, but I think it would be fascinating. Does that require compromise on behalf of the society? I don't think so, and I'll explain why. And a lot of the SSPX resistance crowd, which is very vocal, although very small, and very fractured, although huge critics of mine, they'll basically think that every action where the society tries to have some sort of legal or canonical deal or whatever with any hierarch in Rome constitutes some sort of bending the knee to modernism, etc. I think that's an improper way to look at it, because it doesn't reflect what Archbishop Lefebvre did. And Archbishop Lefebvre, he worked tirelessly, basically almost till death, to try to do things in the perfectly, normal way. And only when it became impossible did he have to resort to other means. And even at the consecration of his bishops in 1988, he had Bishop Castromayer, who was not a society bishop. The legal standing of the Diocese of Campos was interesting or fascinating, but Castromayer was a diocesan bishop. He just happened to hold fast to tradition and wouldn't budge. I don't know what the huge difference is with having a man like Bishop Schneider or whoever helping out with things. Well, yeah, okay, you might say, well, did you know Bishop Schneider still says the Novus Ordo and stuff? Yeah, I'm sure he does do some Novus Ordo sacraments in his job as a diocesan auxiliary. Does he demonstrate his belief in the traditional Catholic faith? Yes. Does he demonstrate his love for Archbishop Lefebvre? Yes. Does he demonstrate his unity of faith with the SSPX? Yes. Is he a valid bishop? I believe so. I don't think there's any argument against that. And would it be a great thing if men like him would demonstrate their support of Catholic tradition, and therefore Rome's support of Catholic tradition, by doing something like that? I think there's a possibility there that's fascinating. Now, many people would be upset by that for the reasons I said. That would be something that the SSPX hierarchy would have to evaluate. I don't know if it's the solution. It's just an option. And I think Pope Leo is probably going to be exploring a lot of these options, because I think it's going to be anything to avoid a 1988. And if he has any sense, which I think he does, he has a missionary background, and he's going to recognize the service that the society does to the church. A lot of people don't understand the lengths that the SSPX does, that they go to, in order to serve souls in remote parts of Africa and Asia where basically no Catholics are found, especially in parts of Asia. And they go places that there are not even Novus Ordo dioceses in or any outreach, and they're there to save souls. You don't do that if you're a schismatic. That's not how you act. In fact, one of the strongest arguments against Eastern Orthodoxy is that basically since the split, there's been little, if any, evangelization. Yeah, the odd one of their priests, whatever, went to Alaska or something, but that's about it. Whereas with the Catholic Church, the modus operandi of the Church until Vatican II was to go to the ends of the earth and risk life and limb to bring the gospel to all nations, no matter the personal cost. And that's what Archbishop Lefebvre did, and that's what the society priests still do today when most of the church has stopped. Very interesting. So there's a lot there. What's going to happen? My gut, to summarize, I think there'll be some sort of solution reached. I wouldn't be surprised if there was generalized permission. I also wouldn't be surprised if there was some other type of suggestion that, well, we can also just have other bishops help you out. I don't know. I don't know what the right solution is. I think we're in uncharted waters. I think we've seen since 1988 this slow thawing of relations between Rome and the SSPX, which is a good thing, no matter what side you're on. And first it was very doors shut, and then it's a little more open, a little more open, a little more open. Pope Francis, very open. Now the SSPX is in need and wants to follow the protocols properly and do all the things. And we'll see how far Pope Leo is willing to open the door and what we're going to find behind it. And if we do want Rome to return to tradition, then more SSPX involvement and influence on the hierarchs and clerics of the church is a good thing. And again, so long as the modernism doesn't seep in. And there's always the balance. So we'll see. Pray for Bishop Fillet and Bishop Gallaretta, the two remaining bishops. Pray for the repose of the souls of the two deceased SSPX bishops. Pray for Dom Pagliarani, the Superior General, who will have a lot of decisions to make. And pray for Pope Leo and those under him who will be tasked with dealing with this, that they may have wisdom in their decision-making and find a solution that actually helps the cause of Catholic tradition rather than hinders it. All right. That's all I got for you, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you all, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.